Yes, one of us is still sweating bullets because I found out about an hour ago that I had the devotional tonight. So what do you do when you don't know what to do? You take somebody else's lesson. So this weekend, Brianna and I had an opportunity to go on a work trip, and we attended a service down there in Florida, and it's about the prodigal son. And so tonight we're going to be in Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. And I've spoken on the prodigal son before, but Brianna and I heard this lesson, and we heard it with my boss, and it was really good because yes, we all know the story of the prodigal son, but the way that it was portrayed to us was completely different than what I have ever heard growing up to this point. And so we're going to just start in verse 11. We're going to read through a majority of this, and I'll break it up into these different verses that I've got here. But the parable of the lost son, prodigal son, it has three different characters in it, right? You have the youngest son, the father, and the oldest brother. And so in verse 11, it'll start out, "Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that fall to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood." And so right there, verses 11 and 12, we see that the younger son, we'll refer to him as the rebel, he wanted only what was his. And what I mean by that is he did not necessarily want to be a part of the father. He just wanted the father's wealth. He didn't necessarily want to be associated with his father. He just wanted all of the good things that come from it. And so we'll continue reading in 13. "And not many days after, the young son gathered all together that he was given, journeyed to a far country, and there it was wasted on possessions with prodigal living." So verse 13, he goes, he lives in sin. He does whatever he wants to. We read later on prostitutes, just going out to a far country to do whatever it is that he wanted to do, which really was to be separated. So we'll continue reading in verses 14 through 16. "But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And then he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything." We see, you're at the bottom that you can possibly be at. You cannot, for this young rebel son, you could not be any lower. And if you think back in that time, to have a job that is dealing with swine and pigs, I mean, that is considered to be one of the most unclean jobs that you can have. And so I'm sure that there was a bit of a learning curve. He loses everything, and we'll just keep reading. Verse 17, "But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread? Enough bread to spare, and I perish with hunger. I will arise, I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" Now, I don't know about you guys, but have you ever, growing up, realized that you made a really, really, really big mistake? So like me, if I had really made my dad mad, and so I'm sitting there in the bathroom, and I'm preparing this speech, right? That I've got this apology. I'm going to be like, what? Maybe I broke one of Dad's tools. I'm going to be like, "Dad." Actually, no, I'll give a real life example. When my dog chewed up the wall there in the hallway. So I'm getting ready to call him, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's practice it." I'm like, "Dad, I'm gonna come out mad, right?" I'm like, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I couldn't help it. She just got in there and she ripped the baseboards, and so I'm sitting there practicing, right? And then of course Dad's like, it's okay, it's fine. I think actually one of the other dogs did it, right? Well, we get that same kind of feeling here, right? So we see verses 18 and 19. Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please, please make me like one of your servants, right? Being real humble. Okay. So then we get into verses 20 and 21. Verse 20 reads, and he arose, he came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And I'm going to stop here just a second because what was pointed out to me during the sermon when we heard it down in Florida was that back then, you have to realize that these older men, they did not run. Older men today do not run. And it's a big difference from today's older men and the ones back then. For him to get out to run, that shows how important it is for him. And so he runs across, fell on his neck, and he kissed him. And the son started his speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. ... Right? Just pretend that there's a little ... there. Because the way that I would read it would be that the father cut him off. And so the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him. And you have to think back then, the best robe was probably his own robe. Bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf here and kill it. Let us eat and be merry. For this, my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but now is found, and they began to be merry. Now we get to verse 25. There's three different characters, right? The rebel son, the father. Well, now we have the older brother. So verse 25 reads, now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But in verse 28 we read that the older brother was angry, and he would not go in. He was angry, he would not go in. There his father had to come out. And then that is when he decided to plead with him. So he answered and he said to his father, lo, all these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might make merry I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And notice that in verse 30, his brother, right? He did not refer to him as my brother. He referred to him as your son. So the father said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but now is found. And so we see here at the end that, you have this brother who we'll refer to as a rule follower, right? He stayed with the father. The rebel, he went off, left the father. The rule follower, doing what he was supposed to do, whereas the prodigal son was doing whatever he wanted to do. But they're actually more alike than we think. They both want the wealth of the father, right? But neither wanted to be with the father. And I think it shows that there are actually two ways that we can be separated from God. You have the prodigal son, the rebel, right? He he was kind of at an advantage. The older brother, who is the rule follower, at a disadvantage. The younger brother knew that what he was doing was wrong, but the older brother didn't. He didn't know, right? And the reason that this is pointed out to me, or that this is important, is because of the way this chapter starts. And it is Jesus talking to the Pharisees, or in the midst of the Pharisees, verses 1 and 2. And then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And then the Pharisees and the scribes, they complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." And so there you have the older brother who, thinking that he did everything right, being a rule follower, should be happy for his brother. But we see that he is envious, separated from God. And so tonight, as the lesson that was provided to me at Sunday, I'm going to provide you with the same kind of message. If you are the rebel son, if you are lost, God still loves you. And if you are the rule follower and you slip up from time to time, well, he still loves you too. So tonight, if y'all need anything this evening, please come forward as we stand and sing.
Jesus is tenderly calling me home.